Hillary has been lengthening her excuses as to why she lost the election. She didn't really lose the election. It was stolen from her by, I think it's up to 24 different excuses she has now. Number 24 is content farms in Macedonia. And as I said, my grandfather was a Macedonian content farmer, and we often think about, gathering on the porch and recalling the old days on the Macedonian. He never thought that the old content farmers he left behind in Macedonia would one day steal the U.S. presidential election. They are gnarled, hard-working Macedonian peasants, and the way they were able to reach out
and
steal
welcome
the
to
election
the Macedonian Content Farmers Podcast. My name is Jason Miko, coming to you from the foot of the Catalina Mountains in Oro Valley, Arizona, and we are recording this on Sunday, March 17, 2019.
And this is Cvetin coming in from Skopje, Macedonia, where we've turned a corner. It's no longer winter. We're enjoying some lovely springtime weather. And how are you doing there, Jason? You were pretty sick, banged up the last time we were recording.
Yeah, I was. I thank you. I appreciate that. I had a I was just starting with a major cold, but the way I deal with the cold, I take lots of vitamin C. I drink plenty of water. And for a week, I gave up the heroin and the methamphetamines. And so that seems to do the trick. So I'll start up back on those tomorrow. But I'm glad you got spring there. We have spring here. I've got all the doors and windows open. It's 76 degrees Fahrenheit, 24 degrees Celsius. Today is St. Patrick's Day. And I think, Cvetin, that we should quote the Irish patriot Roger Casement, who was executed by the British after the 1916 uprising in Ireland. Mm-hmm. And Roger Casement said, "I know of two tragic histories in the world, that of Ireland and that of Macedonia. Both of them have been deprived and tormented."
And they're on an island with no neighbors.
Exactly, yes. And while we're not going to talk about the Irish backstop and Brexit, we're going to see how that plays out in the coming weeks. We are going to talk, since this is being recorded on St. Patrick's Day, but it will be, by the time we get it edited and uploaded, of course, it'll be on Monday, March 18. And, we've got so much going on in Macedonia, although I think I saw a slight downturn in the amount of news coming out of Macedonia. Maybe it's just wishful thinking. And we want to talk about what's going on, the daily events, the weekly events in Macedonia, because our listeners may not have a chance to kind of follow that. And so this is one of the services we perform in being able to let them know what's going on in Macedonia and in the region. But I really just kind of want to take that 10,000 meter, 30,000 foot perspective on where we are now. We touched on this last week about the timeline. Right now, we've got presidential elections coming up in Macedonia. First round, April 21, second round, May 5. We know the three candidates. We know what's at stake. After that, of course, we have the European Union elections for the European Parliament, so-called as it is. Then we got a long summer. Who knows we know that things kind of slow down in the summer. And then by the end of the calendar year, it looks like Macedonia will probably be given that invitation to NATO. And then it's going to drop off the face of the earth, so to speak. Of course, I forgot to add, we'll see after the presidential elections, after the European Union elections, there's rumors that Macedonia may or may not, together with Albania probably, be given a date to start EU accession talks. That was supposed to happen last year. It did not. So we'll see if that actually happens this summer. But just, taking a step back, again, taking that 10,000 meter, 30,000 foot perspective on where we are, we know that the professional elites in the European Union, in NATO, in the Obama State Department, their biggest goal has been to get Macedonia into NATO. And that's why we had the installation, as we call it, because it was installation of Zoran Zaev and his government. But after that, and we're getting to that after, with Macedonia almost in NATO, things again kind of drop off. And the EU stuff, even if Macedonia gets a date for accession talks, that is a very long and drawn out process. The EU has its own existential problems, as we see each day. Brexit, of course, is supposed to happen 2 weeks from this past Friday, actually. gosh, by the time this gets this podcast is up and loaded, it'll be a week and a half away, and nobody knows where we are with that. But all that to say, I think we're going to finally get to that point where there's not so much news going on in Macedonia, at least news in the mainstream media, the think tanks, the academics, the elected and unelected bureaucrats in the European Union, et cetera, constantly talking about Macedonia, and we can kind of take a breather. Of course, Zoran Zaev was installed, and his government was installed on a promise of basically making Macedonia prosperous and wealthy, and making Macedonians rich in order to keep them there. And so, have wages gone up? Are we seeing an upturn, an uptick in the economy? What's going on there? Is everything great in Happy Land?
Zaev keeps saying this. He's coming out with some numbers, which as we spoke in a previous podcast, it's very difficult for him to back them up. He's trying to visit foreign companies which are drawing in the blue-collar workforce, but so far only one of them is a newly announced company. All the others were opened during the Vimero government administration. So basically we had a year and a half, 2 years of a complete no new factories, no opening of new plants has been announced. And he also stopped nearly completely the implementation of infrastructure funds, especially these Chinese programs, which got the US and the EU so angry. So basically our main infrastructure investments have been stopped until Zaev's government was trying to to renegotiate the deal with the Chinese. And you can imagine this takes time, and trying to bully China is not such an easy proposition. So one of these highways was only recently opened, even although it was 80% completed under Vimero, and the other construction is completely stopped. So, and this was one of the main, these were the two main drivers of economic growth: opening new manufacturing plants in our industrial zones in the low tax regime which Gruevski introduced, and building highways with Chinese money. And both of these projects are completely stopped, but Zaev still claims that he has doubled the investments somehow, but cannot back this up with details, with specifics. And listen, if you talk to normal people that the economy is doing well, they'll just laugh at you. It's comical.
Yeah, well, my experience has always been every time I'm in Macedonia, I get into a taxi, I start talking to a taxi driver about what's going on. They know what's going on. And you find that with taxi drivers around the world, I think, no matter where you go, is that you start that conversation and they'll tell you the unvarnished truth about how things are. And so what you're saying is we just don't see any evidence of Zaev's promised land. I find it interesting. I follow some of the so-called color revolutionaries on Twitter, even the ones who will block me. And I noticed that there's been an absence of tweets from them recently, or very sporadic. And I can't imagine they're very happy these days.
There are some, I like to keep a tab on people who are on colored revolutionaries who left the country after helping install Zaev as this puppet government. One of them who served as his advisor for a few months and then promptly left for the United States under some educational grant which was given by the embassy. And today she was complaining that, these Americans, they misquoted my name. Instead of Ivana, they wrote Ivanka because of
I saw that, yes.
Trump's daughter, and you can't make this stuff up, honestly. A lot of them are angry, but they're angry that there are no more arrests. There is no more retribution and violence against the opposition. So you can't really count on them and seeing the light of what they've done. It's very difficult to get a person who has been fooled and who has been taken for a ride to admit that he has been an idiot and he has been stupid and he has been a useful idiot, as Orban said about his European EPP conservative, quotation marks here, allies. And they will never accept that they have been the idiots. They might turn on Zaev that he failed to accomplish what he promised, and he only accomplished what Vimero said he will do, which is rename the country, redefine the country along ethnic lines, basically make it a third Albanian state in the region, and destroy its sovereignty, open the Macedonian nation to interpretation by Greeks and Bulgarians. This is what has been accomplished, nothing else. Now, he may not fall because of the economy, because the economy was actually doing very well under Gruevski, and we have been a poor country. We became a middle-income country under Gruevski. We're still experimenting and enjoying this shiny new stuff we have here, like a second car in many of the families, like easy access to credits from the banks, which Gruevski allowed to operate more freely in the country. So, a second vacation. Normally one vacation was enough. Now everybody does like a second winter vacation as well. I mean, everybody who's middle class, which is most Macedonians. So we're still enjoying the good life which we acquired in the previous 10 years. And Zaev he's not going to erode this tremendously. Obviously, we have not had a bank collapse or a major factory close or anything like that. Or inflation. This probably won't happen. I doubt that he will be toppled because of economic mismanagement. I mean, Gruevski possibly created a cushion that we could survive even higher income taxes for a while before it affects the country, the economy, before it gets felt at the gas pump or at the market. But he's not improving the situation dramatically.
Yeah, he's not building on the successes that he was given when he was installed as the prime minister. Now, of course, he campaigned on a platform of redistribution of wealth, which means higher taxes. The Ministry of Finance is implementing that. Of course, the economy doesn't turn around in a few months or implode within a few months. Either way, it takes time. So we'll see the longer term effects of that. But to your point of him not being thrown out of office or losing his support just on the economy alone. No, you're right. It'll be a combination of things. It'll be part of it will be the lack of fighting corruption and in some cases increased corruption, nepotism. The crackdown on media freedom. Basically, it's control of the state by one party. And if Stevo Pendarovski were to win the presidential elections, it would be total control of the state by one party, actually, Citizen and Dewey. Which is what the colorful revolutionaries and many of the professional elites in the West wanted. But even they know that's not good for democracy. And over time, that's extremely dangerous for the state of Macedonia.
Yeah, and the most dangerous thing is that we're redefining Macedonia, which no longer is the nation state of Macedonians with full respect for human rights, for all minority rights of all minorities. It is now a completely undefined country, and as nature abhors vacuum, we are currently a vacuum in the middle of the Balkans. We may join NATO technically, legally in the strict, legal sense of the membership, but we are no longer a sovereign country which projects its own nation, its own culture, does not project stability in the region. It does not create stability in the sense that it counteracts the pressures of neighboring countries, Albanian nationalism, Serb, Bulgarian, Greek nationalism. We are no longer, there is no longer any pushback on our part on these pressures. This is what will increase these pressures on Macedonia.
Yes, I agree with you to an extent, but that's why it's ever more important for Macedonians themselves, forget the government, this government or any government, frankly, forget the government. Mm-hmm. It's vital for Macedonians themselves to take control and to do what is necessary to bolster and solidify the Macedonian identity. I'll put in a plug for the article I just published on medium.com, and I think you uploaded to Svest.mk. A Macedonian Covenant is what I'm proposing for the Macedonians, and that is a pledge and a promise between and among Macedonians to do what is necessary to increase and strengthen the Macedonian identity, first and foremost through cultural work, which is what Kriste Mesirkov talked about. And that is the debt that Macedonians owe to each other, because we know this government for sure is not going to do anything to to help solidify and increase the Macedonian identity. So it's going to be up to Macedonians themselves, Macedonians in the Republic, Macedonians in Greece, Macedonians in Albania, Macedonians in Bulgaria, Macedonians wherever they live. And so Macedonian Covenant, I think, is one of the things that could help in this hour of need.
There's going to be a natural reaction to all these pressures. And I'm not sure how this will represent itself, whether this will be a fight at a football match we play with some of the neighboring countries which are pressuring us, or during the Eurovision Song Contest, or...
I always forget about that.
Whether this is going to be an incident during, the migration season for the Macedonians to the Greek beaches, which begins in a few months, where we're going to test in real life this proposition that we have greatly improved our relations. Last year we had a murder in Corfu, which is probably the first murder over the Macedonian issue. It was an Albanian citizen who got into a fight with Greeks over the Macedonian issue, it was reported, and I assume Greek-Albanian issues. He may also have been an ethnic Macedonian. It was never fully clarified. So there is going to be some kind of pushback. It doesn't have to be any new cultural creation, as you mentioned. It could just be reciting something somewhere in a emotionally charged atmosphere, like the Illinden celebration, the appearance of some of the recently liberated people like Durlovsky from this major court case which was ongoing, and his performance at some gathering. Something like this is definitely coming, and we'll be dealing with this for the so long as our independence and sovereignty and nationhood is endangered and under threat, which is obviously going to be for a very long time.
Yes, it is. But the good news, I think, and this kind of is a nice segue into the next subject we want to talk about. The good news, I think, is that we know that Zoran Zaev and his government will not be in power forever. And if we take a look next door, a country over at Montenegro right now, we see a lot of protests going on there. And the protesters are demanding the resignation of long-term leader Milo Djukanovic. Has been prime minister and president off and on for basically since Montenegro's independence. Now, I think the interesting thing, of course, is that everybody's always known about Djukanovic's background and the corruption and the criminality and everything like that. But the West ignored that in 2017 in order to get Montenegro into NATO. Now that Montenegro is in NATO, of course, it's on the path of opening and closing the various EU chapters. The West doesn't need him, and they're happy to cut him loose. And the same thing is going to happen to Zoran Zaev. I promise you that it works like clockwork. And so he is going to be let loose by the same professional elites in the West that have been his handlers heretofore. And I don't think he realizes what's coming. But again, that's the good news. He's not going to be around forever. We know that. That's the nature of politics anywhere you go. Now, next door in Serbia, we have protests also going on. And I think you're following that a little bit more than I am. What's the latest from Serbia?
Well, basically they're doing something like anti-urban style coalition like they have in Hungary. They have taken a very nationalist party, which is far to the nationalist right on Vučić, and they have joined it with this urban, effete, post-national leftist.
They're professionally angry.
Exactly. Belgrader group of people. They had usually protesting with the opposition, and they're now also the protesters are now adopting tactics from Macedonia, and we have President Vučić openly talking about this is a repeat of the Macedonian scenario. They're trying to do to us what they did to Gruevski. He is openly accusing the foreign embassies in Belgrade of funding and fomenting these protests, and he's absolutely right. I have met with some of these protest organizers, their mirror image, carbon copy of the protesters which were recruited for Macedonia. These are football fans, hooligans on the nationalist side, and they have this urban elitist students angry at themselves and everybody else, youngsters from Belgrade.
They're professionally angry.
Exactly. And they have come up with plans of what would be like a symbolic protest, which could escalate, and then they would get images of people being beaten up by the police, punched here and there, and they could use this to their advantage. Something like what happened during the parliament storming in Macedonia, where basically the left provoked the crowd to enter the parliament. They staged the vote deliberately when there was a major protest in front of the parliament, but they also counted that they will be protected by some of their fellow members of parliament, or possibly even very likely infiltrated people within the crowd who would help them, or basically protected by the common decency of the people who entered the building. So basically you get a few kicks and slaps here and there, but then you get this huge image which bolsters your legitimacy, which you can exploit endlessly, for basically the price of a few stitches or a few bruises. So this is what the protesters in Serbia want. They stormed the television building in Serbia, and they waited for the police to kick them out, and then they're now using these images of being dragged out of the building by police in riot gear to bolster their legitimacy. And today they surrounded President Vučić when he was giving a statement from the presidency building, and they tried to prevent him from leaving the building. And again, there was a scuffle with the police, and they want to use this as well. Macedonia is definitely being used as a recruitment center, funding center. Zaev has several businessmen, some of whom he even officially hired as his advisors, who are Serbs and who are close to the Serbian opposition. Serbian opposition leader Đilas was recently in Macedonia meeting with Zaev in Belgrade, and then Serbian officials raised this issue, like the defense minister, who is the outspoken mouth of Vučić. He came out and said this is unacceptable. You are meeting with protest organizers, people who are trying to topple our government by illegitimate means. Zaev is definitely funding them, to giving them businesses in Macedonia, to these Serbian companies businessmen who supported initially Zaev, and now he's paying them back by giving them money, giving them businesses in Macedonia, which they then they use the proceeds to fund the protests. And as I said, Vučić openly raised the issue of a Macedonian scenario being prepared. One of the U.S. Embassy people who left the diplomatic service, Stevenson, he's now widely rumored to be working. He works in Macedonia. He has a company with Zaev's lawyer, Filip Medarski, but he has allegedly also hired Serbian people who are involved in the protests. And lastly, we had Vučić raise the issue of the draconian sentencing of Macedonian Interior Minister Mitko Čavkov over the parliament incident which I mentioned. This happened just this week. He was sentenced to 18 years in prison, and several other police officials have been sentenced to 15 years in prison as well, along with some of the protesters who also received huge sentences from 7 up to 15 years. And Čavkov and the other police, they're essentially sentenced for not acting fast enough to protect the opposition, the SDSM members of parliament who provoked the entire incident by the vote they staged, from the crowd. Even though obviously SDSM and DUI did not call the police and tell them, listen, we plan to stage a vote at 6 p.m. You might want to have your riot police ready. You know, they know what they were planning, but they didn't call for reinforcements back up. They did not ask for their protection to be guaranteed ahead of time so the police could prepare. And now Vučić is saying, okay, fine. So they sentence the interior minister for not acting fast enough to stop the incident, while in our case, our police, our interior minister acted when the protesters occupied essentially the Serbian radio television building. He sent the police out, they had them pulled out, and now you're objecting because the police did its duty throughout the protesters, the unruly protesters, who very likely would have beaten up some journalist if it had lasted longer. So, but yeah, this is going to be like a complete double standard on the part of the international community. In Macedonia, they said, yes, the police is at fault for not acting against the protesters. In Serbia, the internationals are going to say, no, the police should not have used force and should not have expelled the protesters. This is clearly one of those Occupy Wall Street, occupy this, occupy that style protests, clearly engineered in workshops organized by the diplomatic corps here and the professional protesting class, and a number of intelligence agencies which are behind the Macedonian political crisis and are now behind the Serbian and very likely Montenegrin, definitely the Hungarian protests. They're not behind the Albanian protests because they the powers that be in Washington and in Brussels at this point still like Edi Rama and do not support losing Basha. So I do not see the same level of engagement and support for the right-wing protesters in Albania, but there is definitely support for those in Macedonia, Serbia, Montenegro, and especially Hungary.
Right. Well, and going back to what you just mentioned a moment ago about double standards, I always have to bring up the fact that while these arrests happened this week, I think the total number of years of everybody's sentence was well over 200 in total for each of the 18, I think, individuals. But yet, Ali Ahmeti and his ilk not only walk free, but they are part of the governing structure in Macedonia. And it bears repeating that Ali Ahmeti and those around him are responsible for the death, the murder of hundreds of Macedonian citizens. They are responsible for the death of members of the Macedonian army, members of the Macedonian police, innocent civilians, and they are Ali Ahmeti and his ilk are responsible for the death of Macedonian Albanian youth who joined the so-called NLA in 2001 out of some misguided romantic notion of splitting the country in two and creating their own little statelet. He is, in the words of then NATO Secretary George Robertson, a murderous thug, and he walks free, and I will repeat this until the day that he is dead and buried. And after that, I'll continue repeating it as a matter of fact. You want to talk about double standards? That man is evil. Those people around him who were part of the so-called NLA, the National Liberation Army, are evil, and they walk free, and they're part of governing structures, and that is wrong.
Yeah, it's them. It's the Islamist killers from 2012 who killed 4 Macedonian youngsters and one.
And are they in jail now?
No, they're released. I think they're in house arrest or complete arrest. I mean, even if it's house detention, I'm sure nobody would bother checking if they're actually in their houses. I'm absolutely sure they're walking freely in the Albanian parts of the country. This was one of the main promises which Zaev made to the Albanian parties before, to get their support to form the government under Edi Rama's Tirana platform from 2016. And then in prison are the Kumanov attackers, about 30 of them, the terrorist group which attacked Kumanov in 2015. But they actually run the prison with impunity. They would post pictures of their feasts in prison with their friends. They're literally, commanders of the prison, as evidenced when they beat up 2 of the Vemera ministers which were in prison there. This is...
But, yeah, which is a validation. I mean, when members of Vomero who have been, charged and then sentenced by the so-called Special Prosecutor's Office and then put into prison and then they're beat up, that validates to a degree Gruevski's claim that he was going to be murdered if he was put in jail. I can understand that, which is why he claimed political asylum in Hungary. And yet, as you point out, these people are in jail, but they run the jail. Of course, you see that in countries around the world where the criminals are inside the jail and they actually run the jail, and that happens. It's not unique to Macedonia or anything like that. But it does speak to the fact that there is certainly the government, which was elected or installed, I should say, on a prospect of fighting corruption and reinvigorating the rule of law, really hasn't done that at all. And so why should Macedonia then be given by the European Union a chance to start European Union accession talks, to say nothing of what you were just talking about a moment ago and all of the troubles that are going on in Albania with Edi Rama and the opposition there. But let's move on and talk about something not so grim and dark, even though it has its own grimness and darkness about it. It's the presidential race coming up. Today is, again, the 17th. Tomorrow this will be up on the 18th. 21st is this week. That's a month away from the first round of presidential elections in Macedonia. And then second round, of course, is on May 5. We have a very clear choice between the two main candidates, the Citizen Dewey candidate, Stevo Pendarovski, and the VMRO candidate, Professor Gordana Siljanovska. And what is the latest on their campaigning?
Well, it's still the unofficial part of the campaign, so they're not holding any major rallies. They're just meeting supporters across the country. Gordana Siljanovska, the VMRO opposition candidate, she's right now in the phase where she's challenging Pendarovski, the SDSM/police/Albanian mafia candidate, to come to a TV debate with her. He still hasn't agreed to this. He's still avoiding facing her directly. Pendarovski started using North Macedonia, but sparingly in his comments. He would say, I'm running for president of North Macedonia, and then preface this by saying about 10 times, our country, the people of the country, and stuff like that. It's
coward.
Abysmal to look at. It's unbelievable. He's taking pictures. He's the old communist era secret police cadre, one of the younger ones who came out of the school, but he is more and more defining himself with this other very important part of Zaev's wide tent, which is the Albanian mafia. He was just taking some pictures with some of the mobsters who, this is what hurts the colored protesters, these nonsensical, stupid issues they sometimes endorse. Right now, one of these issues is the building of several platforms, floating restaurants on the canyon of Lake Matka near Skopje, which is, the one natural beauty wonder around Skopje, which you used to go and see when you visit the city. And some Albanian guys are building these platforms there, and they're the local mafia, obviously. And Pendarovski is showing up and snapping pictures with them, and they're posting, obviously, these pictures on Facebook because they're trying to boast to the other mafia in the neighborhood that they are close to the future president, as they hope, or at least Zaev's advisor at this point. So they have impunity, and the left-colored revolutionaries here are who endorse Pendarovski. They like Pendarovski much more than Zaev, obviously, because he's this image of an urban person, despite his police background, and he is, and they have also espoused the cause of dismantling these platforms in Matka, and now Pendarovski is snapping pictures with the guys who are building them. So that's a horrible look. This is what gets them angry, not the loss of your nation and your country, but they've chosen to be this quixotic type of knights who fight for these.
Yeah, well, and we always know that the core of Skopje, the capital, of course, is the Czech urban elite, and they're citizen voters, they're far left, etc. They're always going to vote for him and whatnot. But of the two candidates, which one is Stevo kind of sticking around Skopje? Is he campaigning there? Is he going around the country? Is Gordana running around the country? Who's going outside of Skopje to the rural?
Oh, both of them. They're all doing. At least I would even say they're doing more. They're more doing the smaller towns and villages more now at this point than the capital. They would have one rally in each of the large districts of Skopje, and then one rally in each larger city of Macedonia, and then the neighboring area. They would also cover it before the rally. So this is the first round, and then they will basically visit the same cities and places again for a proper official rally. I mean, they were in Ohrid today. They would go to Resend, to Radovish, to the smaller cities at this point more than they would campaign in Skopje.
Right. Well, we'll I think on our podcast next week, the official campaign may have started. We'll have to check. Maybe not yet, actually. We'll have to check on that date and find out, because at that point, then I think we'll start to see some polling numbers and what's going on. Anyway, it's, for the next 7, 8 weeks, it's going to be interesting to follow. And I think, again, as we talked about last week, this will really be a test of where the mood of the population is post-Prespa. and it could be, not will be, but it could be a indicator of the mood of the population, and almost a post-Prespa indicator of how folks are feeling about Prespa and its implementation.
It will be strange to see what happens. I mean, Siljanovska still has not gone as strong as she could on the name issue. I mean, she wrote this long analysis criticizing it, and now she says she's going to build up on that and include the international law professors which worked with her on this, and she's going to form a commission on this. But again, just the words forming a commission, you know where this is going. And obviously, if she goes too hard on this issue, she would lose any hope for international support. Not that the internationals are, have shown that they're prepared to support Vemera after the NATO membership is, we suppose, closing in. In fact, we had this unprecedented criticism of Mickovsky of Vemera by the U.S. Embassy and the German Embassy after he used appropriately, adequately strong language to condemn this Stalinist trial of Chavkov and Yanachinto, and Durlovsky was released. The court dared not arrest Durlovsky for terrorism, but all the other 16 people who were sentenced. So Mickovsky was appropriately harsh on this issue, and the U.S. Embassy and the German Embassy are shouting back at him, and the U.S. Embassy is even posting screenshots from this human rights report, which is written by all means apparently in the embassy here, but by their extremely corrupt and crooked local staffers and diplomats who are in the know, the people in the mold of Stevenson and Bailey. And they're pointing out to the sections of the report they wrote, which say, well, the judiciary has improved after Zaev has become prime minister, which is complete. And of course, at this point, we have Siljanovska is joining in. So she is more reserved on the name issue, but she's becoming more and more vocal on the issue of political persecution of the opposition, as well she should, because what's happening here in this country is complete Stalinism.
Well, yes, and you say complete Stalinism, but that's appropriate because the Zoran Zaev and his Citizen Party, of course, are the successors to the Communist League of Macedonia. So these are people that call each other comrade at their national party congresses, and yet they are, quote unquote, I'm using air quotes, the pro-Western party. You can't be pro-Western and call each other comrade. I'm sorry. That is not appropriate for being in the Western club.
Well, given the direction
but going back,
going.
Yeah, well, that's a whole nother rant. Don't get me started. Don't even get me started as to the direction of the West. Actually, right here, now that you got me started, Cvetin. I saw a tweet the other day about the late, great Judge Robert Bork and his book from 1996, Slouching Towards Gomorrah, which I've read 3 times, and I picked it up again, and I said I'm going to read it again. And in the introduction, he says, quote, "This is a book about American decline." Yep. And this was written in 1996. And he says, "Since American culture is a variant of the cultures of all Western industrialized democracies, it may even inadvertently be a book about Western decline." And of course, slouching towards Gomorrah. Gomorrah refers to Sodom and Gomorrah, the two cities in the Old Testament that were destroyed by God. Whether you believe it or not, doesn't matter. The story is, of course, that they were destroyed by God because of their wickedness. And this book, again, written in 1996. See, you got me on my platform. You got me on my rant here, Cvetin. This book is written in 1996, Slouching Towards Gomorrah. I think a follow-up book should be written, and the title of that would be "We Have Arrived at Gomorrah." So, but anyway, back. I started to say something about Gordana, the Vemero candidate, and you said she's going a little bit slower, and I think that's fine. And again, this taking a 30,000-foot, 10,000-meter perspective, those of us from a conservative worldview, those of us on the right, believe that it is more appropriate to take a more deliberative, incremental approach to the way to culture, towards the nation, towards society, towards change, etc. Our friends on the left, the modern progressives, the modern liberals, etc., do just what the colorful revolutionaries did. They want to burn the whole thing down to the ground and start over. And we could get into a long discussion on the differences between the two, but I think it's appropriate for her to do that. She's getting her ducks in a row, so to speak. She's getting ammunition and whatnot. And in this, I want to talk to our friends in the Boycotira movement who are still thinking about boycotting the presidential elections, and we can't do that. We have got to get her elected over Stevo Pendarovski. Because if the elections were to fail through a boycott, of course, then Talat Jafari would become acting president. So you can't have him as president. You can't have Stevo as president. Gordana has to be president. End of rant.
Yeah, there is most people, I suppose, they will who are on the fence between obviously wanting to prevent an SDSM presidential candidate from winning, but also they don't want to legitimize the process of renaming the country by voting for a candidate who may not be strong enough on reversing the issue. I mean, I suppose people will vote later in the first round, see the way the turnout is developing. If we have turnout similar to the name referendum, then and also if there is clear indications of abuse, of election rigging in the beginning, in the Albanian districts from the very beginning of the vote, which is Stevo Pendarovski's forte. He was head of the State Electoral Commission when Crvenkovski was elected president. And you just look at the turnout maps and the ballot stuffing, like an Albanian village where 300 people out of 700 voted in the first round, and the other 400 are living in Germany. And then in the second round, all 700 people vote in the same village, and literally every vote is for Branko Crvenkovski, like complete, open, overt ballot stuffing, with an extremely scathing report from the OSC about the conduct of the elections, which Stevo Pendarovski organized and conducted. And then he also conducted the 2004 referendum, which Vimera initiated, which was also absolutely not free or fair. And then he was appointed advisor to Crvenkovski for all the good services he rendered him in getting him elected. So a lot of people would not like to legitimize the election. And if something like this happens again in the Albanian districts, I suppose in this case, people would, even Boykotiran people would come out and vote massively for the opposition candidate in an attempt to reverse the irregularities. But if at the end of the day we realize that enough people are being threatened to abstain from voting if they're known opposition supporters, or that Albanian turnout will near 100%, even though half of the Albanians essentially live in Germany and Switzerland, etc. In this case, it's very likely that there's going to be boycott of the second round, and Mickoski more or less said so. He met with Zaev, he asked for some guarantees in that the election is going to be free and fair, including the appointment of a public prosecutor by the opposition. Zaev obviously refused this, and Mickoski then said, there's going to be a second round of the elections, clearly indicating that if the first round goes the way Pendarovski organized the 2004 elections and referendum, then Vimera will boycott the second round, and we might be on the same side with the Boykotiran people again.
Wow. Okay. Well, to be continued. Well, let's take a quick break, put in some beautiful Macedonian music, and then come back with our farmers' picks.
But give me enough of the final stuff that's made near Galway Bay. From peelers all from Donegal, slag on Atrim too. And we'll give an a slip and we'll take a sip of the railroad Mountain Dew. And the food of the hill does an ill still while the smoke curled up to the sky. But the smoke and the smell you can plainly tell that there's whiskey brewing nearby. For
back to the Macedonian Content Farmers Podcast. Cvetin, that wasn't Macedonian music,
Nope,
was it?
This was Irish, but performed by a Serbian band, so in honor of St. Patrick.
Oh, very cool. Okay. Well, it's time to go into our farmers' picks. What do you got?
I'm going to go with this 2009 interview by Greek nationalist politician Andonis Samaras. At this point, I think he was in the opposition or culture minister in the conservative government. I'm not sure which of these two, but then he was later prime minister of the country, and obviously he's the guy who started the name issue as foreign minister in the early 90s when he was discussing splitting Macedonia between Serbia and Greece was one of the proposals, with a Greek buffer zone stretching, let's say, 20 kilometers into Macedonia, like an occupation zone. In this interview with a Greek ERT television, he's discussing what Greece is hoping will be the long-term prospect of Macedonia, which is, as he says, having it divided, split between Bulgaria and Albania, keeping it out of EU, keeping it out of NATO, and in his mind, Macedonia would then be poor, would collapse because it's not integrated in the European Union, and would naturally be split between Albanians and Bulgarians, which he says would resolve their issue. And even the journalist asks him, well, is this in our strategic interest to destroy this statelet, as they call us? Because then we would get greater Albania and greater Bulgaria on our border instead of Macedonia, which now serves as a buffer zone, which discourages the nationalisms of the neighboring countries. And, Samaras is not perturbed by this. He's literally wishing for civil war in a neighboring country. And the only thing that makes this exceptional, what he says, is that he's saying it out loud, while everybody else in Greek politics is thinking this and acting to make this happen, while Samaras was, the fool who was out there waving the flag and saying, this is what we want to happen. The joke was partially on them because Greece was the one which went bankrupt, not only despite being in the EU, but especially because of being in the EU, while Macedonia, as we were discussing, went on a small-scale economic renaissance in the past 10 years, but this was unnaturally cut down and reversed, even though nothing was pointing out toward bringing down the Gruevski government and stopping this process. But this was, through an engineered political process, through an engineered political crisis, the diplomats here, they used the socialist opposition to bring down the government, and they're essentially moving Macedonia toward this resolution which Samaras spoke of, dividing the country between Albania and Bulgaria.
What a lovely human being he must be. Well, that was your quote from him was what, 2009 you said? Yeah, okay. Well, I'm going to go back a little bit further in history. And my farmer's pick is actually a book. I may have mentioned this in the past, I don't know, but it's worth mentioning again. The book is In the Shadow of Olympus, The Emergence of Macedon from 1990 by Eugene Borza, who was a professor emeritus of ancient history at Pennsylvania State University. And the reason I mention this book, and for all of our listeners to pick up and read, is because our Greek friends on Twitter especially, keep bringing out their tireless quotes, trying to make direct connections between Alexander the Great and Philip and the present-day Greeks. But let me just read a couple of quotes here. This one's from chapter 12, The Emergence of Macedon. Quote, as far as the ancient Greeks were concerned, the Macedonians were not Greeks. Here's another quote. There is no evidence suggesting that Macedonians wanted to be Greek. Rather, there was an attempt by Macedonian kings to be recognized on a plane of equality with the Greeks in order that matters of state, war, and peace might be dealt with on the basis of mutual advantage. And I've got this book highlighted and underlined, and the pages dog-eared, and all kinds of quotes like this. And again, his basic premise is that the ancient Macedonians were not Greek, never claimed to be Greek. And there is no direct connection between the ancient Macedonians and the modern-day Greeks, much to the chagrin, I am sure, of our Greek friends. The Emergence, In the Shadow of Olympus, The Emergence of Macedon, Eugene Borza, 1990s when it came out. Great book, highly recommended. Cvetin, always fun talking to you.
We are going a bit long this time.
Yeah, that's okay. We'll see what next week brings. All right, great talking to you.
Έχω άλλωστε, κύριε Κωτάκη, και την πάγια άποψη από το 1992 ότι ένα σύνθετο όνομα όπως το Άννα Μακεδονία, πέραν το ότι παραδίδει τίτλους βαριάς πολιτιστικής κληρονομιάς, εθνικής κληρονομιάς σε μια άλλη χώρα, νομιμοποιεί, και αυτό είναι και το γεωπολιτικό πρόβλημα στην περιοχή που έλεγε ο Κωνσταντίνος ο Καραμαλής, νομιμοποιεί τον αλυτρωτισμό των Σκοπίων. Και όχι μόνο, προσέξτε, γαργαλάει ακόμα και τον αλυτρωτισμό της Βουλγαρίας, η οποία θεωρεί, για παράδειγμα, όταν ακούστηκε το όνομα Άνω Μακεδονία, ότι Άνω Μακεδονία είναι Βουλγαρία, είναι δηλαδή η Μακεδονία του Πυρήνου, όπως τη λένε εκείνοι. Ναι. Και έκαναν μάλιστα και διάβημα στα Σκόπια γι' αυτό. Αφήστε που σε βάθος χρόνου εγώ θεωρώ ότι το Άνω Μακεδονία τελικά θα γίνει η Μακεδονία, δεν θα λέγονται Άνω Μακεδονίτες, όπως λέγονται και οι Βρετανοί Μεγαλοβρετανοί. Μαγνητίζονται από τους Βουλγάρους. Οι Σκοπιανοί είχαν έναν πρωθυπουργό, θα το θυμάστε με τις ομιλίες με το Σιμίτη, που το λέγανε Γεωργιεύσκη. Αυτός ο Γεωργιεύσκη, όπως και χιλιάδες άλλοι Σκοπιανοί, έχει βγάλει βουλγαρικό διαβατήριο και έχουν βουλγαρική υπηκότητα. Και ρωτάτε από εσάς τους δημοσιογράφους στα Σκόπια ο Γεωργιεύσκη, καλά, εσύ πρωθυπουργός των Σκοπίων έχεις βουλγαρικό διαβατήριο? Και λέει, προσέξτε, μην εκπλαγείτε σε λίγο εάν με δείτε πρέσβη της Βουλγαρίας στα Σκόπια. Ο πρώην πρωθυπουργός των Σκοπίων, πρέσβης της Βουλγαρίας στα Σκόπια. Τι σημαίνει? Σημαίνει, εγώ το πιστεύω, δεν ξέρω τον ακριβή χρόνο, αλλά είναι σίγουρο ότι σε λίγο δεν θα υπάρχει ως ενιαία οντότητα τα Σκόπια. Δηλαδή ο χρόνος είναι με το μέρος μας, πρακτικά το λέω, είναι με το μέρος μας, γιατί δεν πιστεύω ότι αυτοί θα αντέξουν να κρατήσουν αυτή την αραγή ενότητα που δεν είναι πλέον καθόλου αραγής.
Μου περιγράφεται ένα μέλλον το οποίο περιέχει εκπλήξεις για όσους δεν το παρακολουθούν από κοντά. Ωστόσο, με βάση την ανάλυση που μου κάνετε, έχω να παρατηρήσω τα εξής. Μας συμφέρει ή δεν μας συμφέρει τελικά να υπάρχει αυτό το κρατήδιο στα σύνορά μας? Διότι αν αυτό το πράγμα διαλυθεί, αυτό το κράτος διαλυθεί, θα το διαδεχτεί μεγαλύτερη Βουλγαρία, μεγαλύτερη Αλβανία. Και θα υπάρξουν ευρύτερες ανακατατάξεις στα βόρεια σύνορά μας, στους πληθυσμούς και στα κράτη της περιοχής. Θα έχουμε και πάλι μεταβολές συνόρων. Μήπως μας συμφέρει το σημερινό στάτους, έχοντας αυτό το κράτος ως μαξιλάρι στα βόρεια σύνορά μας, ή όχι?
Ασφαλώς δημιουργούνται πολλά κράτη στην περιοχή και είναι αφύσικο διπλωματικά ότι δημιουργούνται και χωρίς την έγκριση του ΟΗΕ. Δημιουργείται με το θέμα της Αλβανίας αυτό που σιγά σιγά οι Αλβανοί, για να μην το πούνε Μεγάλη Αλβανία, το ονομάζουν πλέον φυσική Αλβανία και εννοούν τα 3,5 εκατομμύρια τους Αλβανούς στην Αλβανία, τα 2 στο Κόσοβο, περίπου 600.000 Αλβανοί στην περιοχή των Σκοπίων. Είναι δηλαδή κάπου 6 εκατομμύρια όσο είναι η Βουλγαρία, λίγο λιγότερο από τη Σερβία. Αυτά παρατηρώ και προβλέπω. Θα μου πείτε, ρωτήσατε, το υπονοήσατε, κινδυνεύει η Ελλάδα από μια μεγαλύτερη Αλβανία? Εγώ δεν κινδυνολογώ, αλλά και δεν δέχομαι αλυτρωτισμούς σε βάρος της χώρας μου, όπως δεν δέχομαι να υπάρχει στο Σύνταγμα των Σκοπίων αυτό το περίφημο άρθρο που λέει ότι με απόφαση της Βουλής αλλάζουμε τα σύνορα της χώρας. Τρελά πράγματα, ακραία αλυτρωτικά. Κατά τον ίδιο τρόπο αρνούμε να συζητώ τις γελιότητες τύπου Τσάμιδων που καμιά φορά βάζει η Αλβανία. Εάν η Αλβανία γίνει, κύριε Κωτάκη, από 4 εκατομμύρια που είναι σήμερα 6 εκατομμύρια, τίποτα δεν αλλάζει. Η Ελλάδα για μας ως δύναμη, ως ανάπτυξη, ως πληθυσμός είμαστε και περισσότεροι και ισχυρότεροι και πολύ πιο αναπτυγμένοι και δεν υπάρχει απολύτως τίποτα να φοβόμαστε από αυτό. Ούτε βέβαια, και μπορώ, κύριε Κωτάκη, να δεχτώ ότι εκφράζοντας κανείς ελεύθερα αυτές τις θέσεις και τις απόψεις έχει να φοβηθεί, αν θέλετε, και από τον κίνδυνο το λεγόμενο των συμμάχων. Το είδαμε με το σχέδιο Ανάν στην Κύπρο, που πολλοί είχαν προβλέψει, θυμάστε τότε, καταστροφές, και τελικά η Κύπρος μπήκε στην Ευρωπαϊκή Ένωση και όλα πάνε πάρα πολύ καλά.